Okay, so imagine like writing unit tests is, as simple as just saying what you want to check.
Yeah.
That future might be closer than you think
Right.
because of these large language models, the LLMs.
Yeah.
And you've been like really digging into this. You sent us this huge stack of research on using AI to automate unit test generation.
Yeah. It's a really hot topic.
Yeah, we've got like everything from academic papers, a system for automated unit test generation,
Mm-hmm.
even articles, harnessing the power of LLMs,
Mm-hmm.
automated unit testing.
Mm-hmm.
So let's like try to pull out the most interesting pieces for you from all this stuff.
Yeah, let's dive in.
The potential is huge, like completely changing how we approach making software.
Yeah, think about like AI taking on that super tedious part of creating all those tests,
Right.
making sure your code actually does what it's supposed to.
So for anyone listening who maybe isn't, a software developer, let's just quickly cover what unit tests even are and like why they're so important.
Okay, so unit tests are like these mini experiments for your code. You isolate each little component and test it like crazy
Right.
to make sure it's behaving correctly.
Like you want to make sure each ingredient is good before you bake a cake.
Exactly. Like you don't want to find out your flour's gone bad after you've mixed everything together.
Right, exactly. And a system for automated unit test generation,
Yeah.
like points out, that's critical, for catching those errors early and making sure the code is reliable.
Right.
But it also says creating them manually can be like a real pain.
Oh, absolutely. It's so labor intensive,
Yeah.
expensive, and it needs like specialized skills.
Right.
Not exactly the most fun part of a developer's job.
So that's where LLMs come in, right?
Yeah, they offer like a potential solution to automate this whole thing.
Okay, so are we testing or being tested?
Hmm.
Really gets into this whole trend of using LLMs for like all sorts of software testing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get too far, how do these LLMs like Codex, ChatGPT, even Coti5, how do they actually generate unit tests?
It's all about the training. They're fed massive amounts of code and they learn the patterns, the structures,
Right.
the logic, and then you give them a prompt basically, like a description of what you want to test, and they generate the code for the unit test.
So it's like giving them a recipe and they figure out the ingredients and instructions.
That's a pretty good analogy.
Okay.
There are different approaches though, like LLMs and prompting for unit test generation talks about zero-shot learning, where the LLM just generates tests right from the prompt, no examples needed.
Wow.
Then there's few-shot learning that software testing with large language models describes, where you give a few examples of good tests
Right.
to kind of guide them, like giving the LLM a head start. And then finally, you got these retrieval-based approaches where the LLM pulls relevant code from a database.
Oh, wow.
It's like having a whole library of code examples to work with, and LLM-based unit test generation via property retrieval talks about that one.
So like each approach has its own little quirks and, offers different ways to use what the LLM can do.
Exactly.
So what are the real advantages of using LLMs for this compared to like the old school way of doing things?
Well, first off, efficiency. Imagine creating tests in a fraction of the time.
Right.
But it's not just speed, improving the readability of Automatically and ChatGPT versus SBST. A comparative assessment of both point out that LLMs can make tests that are easier for humans to read
Oh, okay.
compared to the old ways. And that's a big deal because if texts are understandable, they're way easier to maintain and debug.
So they're faster and they're spitting out code that's easier for us to wrap our heads around.
Exactly.
That's huge, especially for teams working together.
Yeah, and then there's multi-language support too.
Okay.
ASTER. Natural and multi-language unit test generation with LLMs shows how LLMs can adapt to different programming languages,
Right.
like Java, Python.
Oh, wow.
That's a really big deal for developers who work across different platforms.
It's like having a universal translator for code. But wouldn't it be more important for the LLM to be amazing at one language instead of just okay in a bunch of them?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And it's something researchers are definitely looking into.
Right.
There's a balance, between supporting lots of languages and being really good at one.
Right.
So yeah, the universal code translator idea is cool, but making sure it's accurate and effective within each language is super important.
Right. It makes sense that you'd want to master one before you spread yourself too thin.
Right.
So this all seems really promising, but I'm guessing there's some challenges too, right?
Of course, every new technology has some hurdles.
Right.
Challenges in testing large language model based and large language models as test case generators. Performance evaluation point out that accuracy and correctness are still things to worry about.
Okay.
LLMs can sometimes make tests that are wrong or incomplete.
So they're not perfect yet. What kind of errors do they make?
Well, one problem is something called hallucination.
Hallucination.
Yeah, it's when the LLM creates code that looks right, but it's actually wrong. TestGenEvol, a real-world unit test generation and test completion benchmark, saw this happening.
Oh, wow.
It highlights that these LLMs are impressive, but they're not perfect.
Right.
They can make code that's like grammatically correct, but the meaning is all messed up.
That's kind of scary. So does that mean we can't trust the tests they make without checking them ourselves?
Not necessarily LM4VV. Developing LLM-driven test suite for compiler validation really stresses that humans still need to be involved.
Okay.
Even with AI, help developers still need to review and refine those tests. It's more of a team effort.
So it's like having a junior developer who's super fast but still needs some guidance?
Exactly.
Okay. To make this a bit more real, can you give some specific examples from the research that show both the good and the bad of LLM-based testing?
Sure, let's look at the Aster research when they used it with this Llama 3 70B LLM on Java apps.
Okay.
They found that Aster got a little lower line coverage, but better branch coverage compared to a tool called EvoSuite. Imagine your code is like city map line coverage. Tells you if the tests drove down every street.
Okay.
Branch coverage checks if they took every possible turn at intersections.
Right. You want both of those to be high to make sure you've really tested everything.
Exactly. So in this case, the LLM tool might have missed some lines of code,
Okay.
but it did a better job testing different paths within the code.
Interesting. So it might be better at finding those logic errors.
Right. And those are notoriously tricky to catch with the old methods.
And that connects with what an initial investigation of ChatGPT unit test generation found.
Yeah.
They said ChatGPT had trouble making tests that would even run for some programs. So like zero code coverage in some cases.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that these models are still being developed.
Right.
And they're not some magical solution for every situation.
It seems like the type of code, you know, how complex the program is, maybe even the programming language itself could affect how well the LLMs do.
Yeah, definitely.
Are there any other things that matter?
Yeah. LLM for TDD. Best practices for test-driven development. Using large language models found that how you give input and the expected output data really affected how many prompts were needed to get the right answers.
Oh, wow.
Basically, if you want these LLMs to be efficient test makers, you have to be smart about how you talk to them.
Okay.
It's not just the code, it's the whole context around it.
So the quality of the communication between the developer and the LLM is really important.
Absolutely.
It's about giving the right info in the right way.
Yeah.
This is all super fascinating.
It is, and this whole field is moving so fast.
Yeah.
There's tons of research happening to improve how accurate and reliable these tests are and how easy they are to use.
Before we get too lost in the future, let's go back to what we've learned so far.
Okay.
It seems like LLMs offer a really promising way to automate unit testing and maybe even revolutionize this whole part of software development.
I think so, yeah.
But we have to remember the limitations, you know, and that humans still need to be involved.
Yeah. For sure, it's about using AI's power, but knowing it's not perfect, it's a partnership.
Well said. So for the really mind-blowing part, what does the future hold for this tech? Could it like totally change how we make software?
That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we'll talk about next.
Right. I can't wait.
Yeah. So the future of software testing, AI-powered test case generation and validation. This paper paints this picture of the future where AI can not only make tests, but it can adapt them as the code changes.
Hold on. Are you saying the AI could like keep tests updated without a developer even touching them?
Yeah.
That sounds a little too good to be true.
It's called self-healing tests, and it could totally change how much work it takes to maintain software.
Right.
Imagine tests that just automatically adjust to code changes,
Yeah.
always making sure everything is accurate and reliable and all without us having to do anything.
Wow, that would free up developers to focus on like the more complicated stuff.
Exactly.
What other like futuristic scenarios did the research talk about?
Well, they also discussed this idea of enhanced test optimization.
Okay.
So picture this AI figuring out which tests are redundant,
Right.
getting rid of unnecessary repetition, and then prioritizing the tests that focus on the most important parts of your code.
So it's not just making tests, it's making sure they're the best tests possible.
Exactly. It's like optimizing the optimization.
Right.
And all this efficiency could mean we use resources better.
All right.
Developers spend less time on those boring testing tasks and more time on, creative problem solving and innovation.
We've talked a lot about developers, but what about the people who are like dedicated software testers.
Right.
If AI is doing all the routine testing, what happens to their jobs?
Well, it's not that they disappear. Their roles just kind of evolve.
Right.
Instead of making tests by hand, they could focus on bigger picture stuff.
Okay.
Like planning test strategies, analyzing complex results, and really thinking critically about how good the AI-generated tests are.
So they become more like strategists or test architects.
Yeah, exactly. They go from the doing to the thinking.
Right. And this could actually make developers and testers work together better.
Absolutely.
They'd be using AI as a shared tool to make even better software.
Exactly.
It's interesting to think about how this could change how teams work and how projects get done.
It's not just the code, it's the people writing and testing it.
What about how we teach software development?
Oh, yeah.
If LLMs become the normal way to do unit testing, will new developers even need to understand the basics of testing?
That's a really good question, and people who teach software engineering are talking about it a lot.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be a balance.
Right.
Understanding testing is still going to be important, but so is knowing how to use these AI tools effectively.
It's like learning to drive. You still need to know the rules of the road,
Right.
but you also need to know how to actually drive the car.
Exactly. And this brings up another point. These LLMs could make software development more accessible.
Okay, so
By automating the hard parts, they could make it easier for people who aren't expert coders to make software.
okay.
What if anyone could just describe what they want an app to do and the AI builds it?
That would totally change things. It would open up so many opportunities for people to get involved in making software.
And all those new perspectives and ideas could lead to so much innovation
Right.
and a more diverse group of people making software, which is really important.
It sounds like things are about to change in a big way,
I think so.
from how we test software to how we teach it, and even who gets to make it. The possibilities are huge.
It's exciting.
And we've only scratched the surface of all this research.
Yeah, there's so much more to discover in that stack.
I'm definitely going to dive deeper into it.
Yeah,
This has been a really thought-provoking conversation.
it has.
Before we finish up, is there one last thing you want to leave our listener with, something to think about as they learn more about this stuff?
Yes, as LLMs get even better and more common in software development, how will that change what it even means to test software?
Wow, that's deep.
Yeah.
Will we need to come up with new ways to measure how good software is?
Maybe?
Will we need to completely rethink what it means for code to be correct and reliable when AI is making the tests?
Those are the questions we need to start asking.
Right.
The future of software testing is happening now,
Yeah.
and we all have a part in making sure it's a good one.
Yeah. It's both exciting and a little scary to be part of this. you know? We've talked about a lot, from how this LLM-based testing works to how it might change software in the future.
Yeah, it's been a lot.
But before we go, I'm curious, from all the research you read, what surprised you the most?
Honestly, it was how fast this whole field is moving.
Yeah.
Like a few years ago, LLMs writing good unit tests, that was like sci-fi.
Right.
But now it's becoming real.
Yeah.
The research you shared shows that
Right.
it's amazing how quickly things are changing.
It really shows how fast AI is developing, and that we all need to keep up.
Yeah,
We can't just sit back and watch. This is changing the world whether we're involved or not.
exactly. We have to be part of shaping how these tools are made and used
Right.
to make sure it's all happening responsibly and ethically.
Yeah.
It's not just about the tech itself, it's about the values behind it.
Absolutely. It's a call to action for all of us, not just people in tech.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be informed and involved in this crazy new world.
For sure.
Well, this has been a really cool deep dive into LLM-based unit test generation.
It has.
We've looked at the technical details,
Yeah.
how it might change software development, and even how it could affect society.
We've seen how it could make things more efficient, how it could improve code quality, and even make it easier for more people to create software.
Right.
But we also talked about the challenges, the things LLMs still struggle with, and how important it is to develop this tech carefully and responsibly.
It's been a super insightful journey, and I want to thank you for sharing your research with us.
It's been fun.
The future of software development is happening right now.
Yep.
And it's up to all of us to make sure it's a good one.
Absolutely. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep pushing the limits of what's possible.
Well said. Until next time.